Claraara Marin had spent 16 years living in silence and grief. At 45, she still worked at the Asheville Public Library, where she'd missed the call that shattered her life. Her 2-year-old daughter Ella had vanished from Little Acorns Daycare on an ordinary afternoon, and nothing had ever been ordinary again. Her marriage didn't survive. Her husband left when the weight of absence became unbearable. But Claraara never left Asheville. Something in her refused. What if Ella came back? What if the case reopened? She'd clung to flyers, dead leads, and worn out hope, because letting go meant admitting Ella was gone forever. The library became her shelter, the one place where life was still organized, predictable, controllable. But that fragile stability was about to break. That morning, while sorting through new magazine deliveries, Claraara froze. On the cover of Vogue stood a young woman with soft brown hair and a gaze that pierced straight through her. But it wasn't the eyes that shattered her. It was the violet birthmark blooming like a lotus across her left eye, Ella's birthmark, the exact same shape and hue. Claraara's heart thundered in her chest. She flipped the pages with trembling fingers. More photos. The girl, identified as Emmy Wells, was featured in a rustic farm setting. Not a polished model, but someone captured mid-motion, mid-life. Emmy. Claraara had never heard the name, but her soul didn't need a name to know her own daughter. After 16 years of silence, the universe had whispered back, loudly. She didn't hesitate. Claraara grabbed her phone and dialed Detective Gary Holden's number, still saved after all these years, straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. This couldn't be explained over the phone. She clutched the magazine to her chest, informed her coworker she had to go, and rushed out of the library like someone carrying a fragile, burning truth. The drive to the police station blurred past trees and buildings she'd seen 1,000 times before. But today, they felt different, like they were moving with her. Like maybe, just maybe, they were taking her home. Hope, something she'd buried long ago, pulsed wildly beneath her ribs. If that birthmark was real, and not some cruel coincidence, then Ella wasn't lost. She'd just been hidden. At the Asheville Police Department, Claraara asked for Detective Holden. The officer at the front desk checked the records, then led her through familiar hallways. When Gary entered, she barely recognized him, his hair now completely grey, his face worn, but his eyes still carried the same quiet focus. She didn't speak. She handed him the magazine. He studied the cover for a long moment, his jaw tightening at the birthmark. "We can reopen the case with this," he said. There was no doubt in his voice. It wasn't just the mark. It was the bone structure, the eyes, the age. "We'll contact the magazine, track down the shoot location, and find out who she is," he continued. For the first time in 16 years, Claraara heard something she hadn't dared hope for. Urgency. She walked out of the station no longer just a grieving mother. She was a woman on a mission, someone whose love had outlasted time, and now had a face to chase. The name Emmy Wells may have been on that cover, but to Claraara, she would always be Ella, her daughter, taken too soon, and now finally within reach. And yet, this was only the beginning. She didn't know about the secrets that waited on a rural farm, the lies hidden beneath polished smiles, or the dark legacy of a long-buried crime. All she knew was that justice had finally stirred, and this time, she wouldn't stop until the truth was brought into the light. Detective Gary Holden didn't waste time. After comparing the magazine photo to Ella's childhood records, including the rare birthmark around her left eye, he made immediate calls to Vogue's editorial team. Claraara sat beside him, gripping her purse as if bracing for impact. When the call finally connected, the editor confirmed the photo was real, taken by a traveling photographer named Leah Dalton. She had photographed rural farmhands for a special edition on America's hidden elegance. One of those farms was listed as Kesler Farm, just north of the Blue Ridge Line. That was the shoot location for Emmy Wells. Claraara's heart pounded. The name was unfamiliar, but the proximity to Asheville felt eerily close. Gary turned to her. "We're sending a team today," he said. "And if you're willing, you can come with them." There was no hesitation. "I'm going," she said, voice steady. "I've waited 16 years. I won't wait another day." Within 30 minutes, Claraara was introduced to Officers Bennett and Martinez, who would escort her to the farm. "I'd like to drive myself," she said quietly. "I have things in my trunk. Ella's things." The officers exchanged glances but nodded. Soon, a police cruiser led the way down winding mountain roads, Claraara's Honda trailing behind. The further they drove, the narrower the roads became. Paved lanes gave way to gravel paths lined by golden-leaved trees and wide open fields. For 2 hours, Claraara kept her eyes locked on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Fear and hope battled inside her. What if Emmy wasn't Ella? What if it was all a mistake? But that birthmark, it was too specific, too perfect. Her instincts screamed, this was her child. The convoy eventually reached Kesler Farm, a sprawling, well-kept property with barns, outbuildings, and rolling fields stretching in all directions. It wasn't a struggling family farm. It was thriving. A man and woman emerged from the farmhouse, John and Miriam Kesler. They were polite, measured. When shown the magazine, Miriam's eyes flickered with something Claraara couldn't read. "Yes, the magazine folks came through," Miriam said. "Emmy was helping out that day, but she's not ours. She was just labor from a rotating pool we use." The officers pressed further. "Where did she come from?" "Rowan," John said vaguely. "He sends workers now and then, somewhere up in the mountains. Don't know where exactly." But when John scribbled Rowan's phone number onto a torn piece of paper, something about the way he avoided eye contact sent a chill through Claraara's spine. The officers asked to search the property, and the Keslers, after a moment's hesitation, agreed, while Officers Bennett and Martinez inspected the barns and sheds. Claraara stood on the gravel driveway, observing the couple. Miriam offered water and tried to smile, but her hands were tightly clasped. They were too careful, too precise. And when she asked if Emmy had ever mentioned family, Miriam replied, she kept to herself, never talked about her past. The evasiveness made Claraara's gut twist. Minutes later, the officers returned. Nothing suspicious. "We'll follow up on Rowan," they said. But even as Claraara returned to her car, her eyes remained fixed on the farmhouse. Something wasn't right. The way the Keslers spoke about Emmy, it was like they were rehearsing, like they were hiding something that wasn't theirs to keep. Back in town, Claraara checked into a roadside motel, Pine Ridge. As she paid for the room, her eyes fell on a flyer taped behind the counter. A local tavern, Miller's, was hosting comedy night. "Everyone around here goes," said Doy, the woman at the desk. "Farmers, workers, ranchers. It's where folks gather." Claraara paused. Maybe someone there knew Rowan. Maybe someone had seen Emmy before. Doy hadn't recognized the girl in the magazine, but the way she spoke about the tavern stuck. Claraara nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. "I think I'll stop by." That night, she would trade her quiet motel room for the only place where small-town secrets might just slip through someone's lips over beer and laughter. Miller's Tavern looked exactly like Claraara imagined a rural gathering spot would. Mismatched chairs, old farm tools hanging on wooden walls. A faint scent of grease, smoke, and sweat built up over years. It was packed for a weeknight. Locals sipping beer, farmers clustered in corners, laughter rising from a small stage where a comedian tried his best. Claraara moved through the room, invisible but observant. At the bar, she ordered club soda and settled in. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back into a short ponytail, introduced himself. "Name's Bran," he said with a smile. "You're not from around here, are you?" Claraara hesitated, then decided honesty was her best weapon. "I'm looking for someone," she said softly. "My daughter was taken from daycare 16 years ago. I think she might have been here. I saw her in a magazine." Bran's smile faded, as Bran leaned in, listening closely. Claraara described the photo shoot, the farm, and the girl, Emmy Wells, with the birthmark. Bran's face changed. Something in him tightened, just slightly. "The Keslers?" he asked. "They don't come around here much. Keep to themselves." His tone was guarded. Then, as if pulled by something deeper, he added, "My mom worked at a daycare once, years ago, before she died." The name Maurice Pledger struck like a hammer in Claraara's chest. Bran confirmed it. His mother was Maurice. Claraara's mind reeled. Maurice Pledger was the woman captured on the daycare's surveillance footage, leading Ella away. 2 weeks later, her body had been found hanging in Pisgah National Forest, officially ruled suicide, but many had doubted it. Now, her son stood here, alive, unaware, tangled in this web. Claraara asked Bran gently about his father. "Rowan," Bran said. "Rowan Pledger. Lives not far from here. Has a small farm, not as big as the Keslers. Keeps to himself." Her breath caught. Rowan, the same name given by the Keslers. It all began connecting. Bran looked confused as she pulled up the old news article showing Maurice's face. "That's my mom," he whispered. Then louder, shaken. "She wasn't like that. She loved me. My dad always said she was killed by someone over a debt." Claraara listened in silence. A theory had always existed that Maurice didn't act alone, that Ella had been taken to settle something darker. Bran's eyes filled with conflict. "If she really took your daughter, and if my dad was involved, I need to know the truth," he said. "You need to talk to him, and I'll take you there myself." Outside, Bran led Claraara behind the tavern to his old pickup truck. She would follow in her car. "I have things that belong to Ella," she explained. "I want to bring them." As she started her engine, Claraara's hands trembled. They were going straight to Rowan Pledger's farm, a place that might hold the answer to a question that had haunted her for 16 years. In the darkness, she texted Detective Holden her location, just in case. The reception was weak, but she hit send and prayed. Her headlights followed Bran's taillights down narrow country roads, flanked by dense woods and moonlight. In her rearview mirror, the motel and tavern vanished into shadow. What lay ahead could change everything, or shatter her all over again. After 20 minutes of dirt roads and gravel turns, Bran's truck slowed in front of a small farmhouse tucked between trees. It was modest but tidy, with outbuildings and a small pasture. Another car was already there, its engine cooling, driver's door ajar. "That's Dad's car," Bran said grimly. Claraara's pulse spiked. The pieces were sliding into place too quickly. She parked beside Bran and stepped into the cool night air. Bran called out, "Dad, you hear?" A man emerged from the shadows near the porch, tall, grey-streaked and worn by time. Rowan Pledger. His eyes flicked between Bran and Claraara. "What is this?" he asked. "Who are you?" Claraara's voice was steady. "I'm the mother of the little girl your wife stole, and I think you know exactly where she is." Rowan Pledger's face twisted in disbelief. "This is nonsense," he said gruffly. "My wife never kidnapped anyone." But Bran stood his ground. Mom worked at a daycare in Asheville. She disappeared 2 weeks after a little girl did. They ruled it suicide, Dad. But now this woman, Claraara, says the girl was her daughter. Claraara stepped forward. "Your name came up at the Kesler farm. They said you sent Emmy Wells to them. I've seen the birthmark. I've seen her face. That girl, she's my daughter. Rowan looked ready to argue again until a voice called from the porch. Rowan, what's going on? A young woman stepped into view, backlit by porch light. Her silhouette was unmistakable, tall, slender, familiar. And as she approached, the light revealed the unmistakable lotus-shaped birthmark beneath her left eye. Claraara gasped, frozen. Bran's eyes widened, and Rowan's face went pale. The young woman looked between them, visibly confused. Is everything okay? She asked. Claraara's voice trembled. My name is Claraara Marin. I believe you might be my daughter. The girl blinked, stunned. What? That can't be. My parents are John and Miriam Kessler. Rowan immediately stepped in. Enough. She's confused. You're upsetting her. But Bran wasn't backing down. Dad, what's going on? He demanded. Why is she here? What are you hiding? Emmy turned to Rowan, her brow furrowed. Why would someone say something like that? Rowan's gaze dropped. Because people want to ruin lives, he muttered. But Claraara pulled out her phone and held it toward Emmy. The screen showed old photos of Ella as a toddler. Same eyes, same birthmark. Emmy stared. Her hand rose instinctively to her face, fingers brushing the violet mark as if feeling it for the first time. I've seen those photos, Emmy whispered. Somewhere. In a dream. Maybe. Or in my own face. Claraara took a breath. You were taken from daycare at age 2. This birthmark, no one else has it. The Kesslers told me you were just a day worker. But you lived with them, didn't you? Emmy hesitated, then nodded slowly. They raised me, said I was special, said people were after me. They kept me on the farm, homeschooled me, never let me go anywhere alone. Her voice trembled. I never thought to question it. Rowan tried again. They were protecting you. It was for your safety. But Bran interrupted. His voice sharp. Like Mom protected you too, Dad? Is that what you told yourself after she took Ella? Rowan's face hardened. She was trying to help me. We owed money. They said it was either pay or pay with blood. The confession slipped out before Rowan could stop himself. Emmy recoiled. You mean they sold me? Her voice cracked. And John and Miriam just bought me? Rowan looked exhausted. They couldn't have kids. They were desperate. I didn't know what else to do. Maurice. She went too far. Bran's voice dropped. They murdered her, didn't they? After she handed over the child. Rowan nodded faintly. Said she knew too much. They made it look like suicide. Emmy stepped back, hands shaking. So my whole life, my name, my family, it's all a lie? Claraara's heart broke as she watched the girl crumble. You're not a lie, she said softly. You're mine. You've always been mine. Emmy looked at her, fearful, confused but searching. Then suddenly, she pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police, she said, voice trembling. I want to know the truth. All of it. Minutes later, red and blue lights lit up the trees. Sirens pierced the still night air as police cruisers arrived at Rowan's property. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands on belts. Claraara recognized some from earlier. Emmy stepped forward, speaking clearly. My name is Emmy Wells, or so I thought. This woman says I was kidnapped 16 years ago. I want answers. I want to know who I really am. The officers exchanged looks. One stepped aside to radio HQ. Another asked Claraara for ID and the magazine. She complied, her movements mechanical. Rowan remained still, silent. As officers separated everyone for questioning, one whispered to Claraara, Detective Holden's on his way. We've flagged this as a child abduction case with possible trafficking ties. Claraara nodded, tears filling her eyes. For the first time in 16 years, justice was no longer an idea. It was here. It was moving. And it had a name. Ella. Inside the police station, the tension thickened with each passing minute. Claraara was led to a separate interview room. Emmy, Rowan, and Bran were questioned individually. Detective Holden arrived an hour later, face tight with exhaustion, but eyes burning with resolve. "We're treating this as an active kidnapping case," he told Claraara. "The birthmark match, the testimony, and Rowan's confession. This is enough to charge." Claraara swallowed hard. She didn't want revenge. She wanted her daughter back. Still, the road to justice demanded consequences. Holden ordered an immediate search of the Kessler farm. If they were part of this, they would answer for it. The Kesslers were arrested before dawn. Officers arrived at the farm quietly, finding John and Miriam still asleep. Both were taken into custody without resistance. At the station, their composure cracked. Miriam admitted they'd been approached by an unnamed man nearly 2 decades ago, offering them a child. They knew it wasn't legal, but they'd convinced themselves it was fate. "She was ours," Miriam whispered. "We gave her everything." But under questioning, they revealed key details: payments made in cash, Emmy never formally enrolled in school, the birth certificate forged with help from someone in Tennessee. Holden nodded grimly. "It's all coming together now," he said. Meanwhile, Emmy sat alone in the interview room, arms crossed tightly. When Holden entered, she looked up, guarded. "Am I Ella?" she asked, voice barely audible. "We believe so," he said gently, "but we'll confirm it through DNA testing. It won't take long." Emmy closed her eyes. The floor beneath her felt less steady than ever. "Everything I knew," she said, "was built on someone else's pain." Holden sat with her for a while. "You were a child. None of this is your fault. And Claraara, your mother, she never stopped looking." Emmy said nothing, but the weight in her eyes softened slightly. "Can I talk to her?" she finally whispered. Holden smiled. "I think she's been waiting 16 years to hear those words." Claraara waited in the hallway when the door finally opened. Emmy stepped out, looking older than her years. Their eyes locked. Claraara didn't rush her. She simply whispered, "Hi, baby." Emmy's lip trembled. "I don't know what to feel." Claraara nodded. "Then feel everything. I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, carefully, Emmy stepped forward. Claraara opened her arms, and for the first time in 16 years, she held her daughter. Not the baby who vanished, but the woman she had become. Bran watched from a distance, tears in his eyes. Holden gave them space. In that moment, time didn't collapse, but it did begin to heal. Detective Holden sat across from Rowan Pledger in the dimly lit interrogation room. Rowan, hands clasped tightly, finally broke his silence. "It started with debt," he said. "I owed money to people who didn't just take property. They took lives." Morris had tried to shield him, but when they couldn't pay, the traffickers gave her a choice: deliver a child or face consequences. She chose to protect Rowan. "She took the girl from the daycare and handed her off at the edge of the forest," Rowan confessed, voice breaking. "She thought they'd leave us alone. But they didn't." 2 weeks later, Morris's body was found hanging in Pisgah National Forest. The traffickers had silenced her. For 16 years, Rowan carried that guilt and the knowledge that his wife had died for a crime they both enabled. "I buried it," he said, "but it never left me." Holden quietly replied, "It never does." The deeper the investigation went, the clearer the picture became. Rowan provided names, locations, and payment records, finally confirming suspicions about a rural child trafficking ring. The network operated in isolated farming communities, preying on families with crushing debt. Children were taken and sold under false adoptions, often to couples like John and Miriam Kessler. The Kesslers, under pressure, confessed that they'd purchased Emmy from one of Rowan's contacts. They admitted they knew the adoption wasn't legal, but after years of trying and failing to adopt through the system, they justified it as a second chance. Holden stared at them across the table. That wasn't a second chance. That was someone else's child. With their full confession and Emmy's confirmed identity, the district attorney was ready to file federal charges. For the first time in years, the case had weight, it had direction, and it was moving. Meanwhile, Emmy, now confirmed as Ella Marin, was struggling to process the truth. She sat in the quiet of her motel room, staring at childhood photos that Claraara had brought. In one, she was a toddler in a blue sundress, smiling with cake on her face. "I feel like I'm watching someone else's life," she whispered. Claraara sat across from her, hands folded tightly in her lap. "It was your life," she said gently, "before it was taken." Emmy looked away. "I don't know if I can forgive them, or even myself. I grew up thinking the Kesslers were heroes." Claraara didn't push. "You don't have to forgive. You just have to know none of this was your fault." Emmy nodded slowly, emotions swelling in her throat. "Do you think I'll ever feel whole?" Claraara answered honestly. "I don't know, but I'll be right here, every step you take toward finding out." Later that night, Bran knocked softly on Emmy's motel door. She opened it, exhausted but calm. "You okay?" he asked. She shook her head but smiled faintly. "Not even close." He sat beside her, silent for a while. "When I found out my mom was involved, I hated myself," Bran confessed, "but I didn't choose her actions, and neither did you." Emmy looked at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "What if I never figure out who I really am?" Bran gave her a steady look. "Then start from here, from what you know now. Your name, your truth, your people." He handed her a small photo he'd found behind the tavern bar, an old picture of Morris holding him as a toddler. "We both lost someone to this," he said softly, "but maybe we can help each other find something too." In that moment, a quiet bond began to form. At the station the next morning, Detective Holden pulled Emmy aside. "We've confirmed the final link in the chain," he said. "The forged documents, Rowan's confession, the Kesslers' admission. It's enough. You're legally Ella Marin again, if you choose to reclaim it." Emmy took a deep breath. "I want to, but I'm keeping Emmy too. It's the name I survived under." Holden nodded, impressed by her clarity. "You get to choose now. No one else decides your path anymore." Claraara watched from across the lobby, tears brimming. Her daughter, not just found, but rising. There was still healing ahead, and pain, and memory. But the silence that had ruled for 16 years was broken. Ella wasn't lost anymore. She was found. And more importantly, she was heard. The courtroom was silent as John and Miriam Kessler stood before the judge. Their lawyer entered a guilty plea to all charges: kidnapping, falsification of legal documents, and obstruction of justice. Emmy sat beside Claraara, her expression unreadable. "I need to be here," she'd told her mother that morning, "even if it hurts." Reporters packed the benches, cameras flickering outside the courthouse doors. This wasn't just a local case anymore. It had sparked national attention. "How could a child be hidden in plain sight for 16 years?" one headline asked. The judge spoke firmly. "You deprived a mother of her child, and a child of her truth." He sentenced the Kesslers to 25 years. They didn't resist. As officers led them away, Miriam looked back at Emmy, eyes pleading. But Emmy didn't flinch. She had cried enough. Today wasn't about sadness. It was about drawing a line in the sand that could not be crossed again. Rowan Pledge's hearing came next. Unlike the Kesslers, he showed signs of wear. His cooperation with the investigation had led to more arrests. At least 7 other suspects involved in the trafficking ring In exchange, the prosecution recommended a reduced sentence. You helped us dismantle something toxic, the judge acknowledged, but your role in its existence cannot be ignored. Rowan was sentenced to 12 years, with the possibility of parole after 8. Emmy didn't speak during the proceeding. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. He's not a monster, she whispered to Claraara later. But he chose silence for too long. Claraara nodded, holding her hand. And now he'll sit with that silence, where it belongs. The past was no longer pressing itself into their future. It was being recorded, judged, and buried, one truth at a time. Detective Holden received a commendation for solving the long cold case. When asked to speak, he declined the spotlight. This isn't my story, he told reporters. It's Claraara's, it's Ella's, it's every mother who kept searching and every child who didn't stop hoping. Emmy watched him from afar, grateful but distant. She hadn't fully accepted the label survivor. She was still adjusting to her dual identity. Sometimes I wake up and don't know which version of myself I am, she confided to Bran. The one they raised, or the one they stole. Bran didn't offer easy comfort. Maybe you're both, he said. And maybe that's okay. He wasn't trying to fix her, just walk beside her. That mattered more than anyone realized. Weeks passed. Emmy began therapy in earnest, attending sessions twice a week. She journaled compulsively, trying to make sense of years that felt stolen. But alongside grief came new language, agency, identity, voice. I'm not done being angry, she told her therapist, but I'm ready to stop being quiet. Claraara gave her space to process, but stayed close. One evening, Emmy came home with ink smudged on her hands. I started writing something, she said. Not sure what it is yet. Maybe it's just for me. Or maybe someone else needs to read it too. Claraara smiled. Your story saved you. One day, it might save someone else. The scars weren't fading yet, but Emmy was no longer hiding them. She was beginning to own them. That summer, Emmy legally changed her name, Ella Emmy Marin. I kept the name they gave me, she explained, but added the one that belonged to me first. I'm not choosing between the two. I'm claiming both. DMV paperwork became an emotional ceremony. Small, bureaucratic, but quietly monumental. Outside, Claraara wept. You came back to me, she whispered, but you came back as yourself. Ella hugged her. I'm not finished healing, but I finally feel like I have permission to begin. Justice had taken years. It had cracked through decades of silence, reached across twisted lies, and pulled a daughter from the dark. But now there was light. Ella and Claraara moved into a small cottage just outside Asheville. A white-painted home with creaky floors, a porch swing, and enough space for quiet. They didn't call it a fresh start. That felt too clean. It was more like replanting after wildfire. In the backyard, they dug soil together and planted lavender, tomatoes, and a fig tree. It helps, Ella said, her fingers dark with earth. It gives me something to nurture. Claraara simply nodded. She didn't push for long conversations. Some wounds healed best in silence. Their days were simple. Coffee on the porch, therapy appointments, the occasional thrift run into town. But beneath the quiet routine was something powerful. Presence. For the first time in 16 years, they were building something together. No longer strangers separated by time and tragedy. Some nights were hard. Ella would wake up in a cold sweat, breath shallow, memories flashing back in fragments. The Kesslers' isolated farmhouse, locked doors, whispers she wasn't supposed to hear. I used to believe they were protecting me, she admitted to Claraara one night, voice trembling. Now I wonder what they were protecting me from. Claraara didn't offer quick answers. She pulled her daughter close. They made you small, so you wouldn't question anything. But you were never meant to be small. In those quiet, vulnerable hours, Ella began to untangle the gaslighting, the manipulation, and the strange obedience that had kept her tethered for so long. Healing wasn't a straight line. It zigzagged, retreated, surged forward. But every time Ella fell apart, she learned how to rebuild with a little more strength. Bran visited often, not as a savior, but as a steady presence. He brought over leftover meals from the tavern, small potted plants, and once, an old guitar he said he didn't know how to play. "I figured maybe you do," he shrugged. Ella didn't, but she learned. Music filled the little house slowly, each note shaky but growing in confidence. One day she played a tune without thinking. "I made this up," she said shyly. Claraara was in tears before it ended. "That's the sound of you returning to yourself," she whispered. It wasn't a grand symphony. It was quiet and honest, and that was more than enough. One afternoon, Ella asked Claraara to drive her to the field, behind Rowan's old farmhouse, the place where the truth had unraveled. She stood there in silence, watching the wind ripple through the grass. "This is where I used to come and pretend I was someone else," she said. "Not their daughter, just someone free." Claraara took her hand. "And now you are." Ella knelt and placed a lotus flower, her birthmark's namesake, into the ground. "For Maurice," she said softly. "Not because I forgive her, but because she died in the middle of this, and maybe some part of her tried to stop it." It wasn't closure, but it was a gesture. A turning of the page, a mark of moving forward without erasing what had been written. That evening, Ella stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the setting sun. "You know what's strange," she said. "I don't think I want to go back to being just Ella or just Emmy. I want to be both." Claraara smiled gently. "You're more than either name. You're every part of your journey. The lost years, the reclaimed ones, the ones still to come." For the first time, Ella believed her. She wasn't defined by what had been done to her or by the people who tried to rename her. She was rebuilding from ashes, and this time, she got to choose what grew. She had survived the fracture. Now, she was shaping the foundation. The day Ella returned to the DMV, it wasn't just paperwork. It was ceremony. She wore a plain grey sweater, hair tied back, no makeup. "I want to look like myself," she told Claraara. The form in her hand asked for her legal name. She paused. Then slowly, deliberately, she wrote, "Ella Emmy Marin." "I'm not erasing what they called me," she said, "but I'm reclaiming what they took." Claraara nodded, eyes brimming. "Both names shaped you, one through survival, one through love." As the clerk stamped the document, Ella let out a long breath. Her name was hers again. Not forged, not chosen by others, not whispered in secret. This was her truth in black ink and official seal. She smiled, not wide, but real. Later that week, she held a small box in her lap. Journals, photos, old sketches she'd drawn as a child. Things she'd been too scared to look at. Bran sat nearby, quietly folding flyers for a community event. "I want to write about it," Ella said suddenly. "Not just the crime, but everything after. The silence, the rediscovery, the contradictions." Bran looked up. "Then write it, even if it's just for you, or especially because it's for you." Ella picked up a pen and opened a fresh notebook. The first page read, "The Girl with the Lotus Mark." She didn't know what the book would become, but she knew it would be honest. And this time, no one would rewrite her story but her. Publishing the manuscript wasn't planned. She shared chapters with her therapist, then with Claraara, then eventually, nervously, with an independent press that specialized in trauma narratives. They called 2 weeks later with an offer. "We believe this book will matter," the editor said. Ella sat stunned, the phone trembling in her hand. "I didn't write it to matter," she whispered. "I wrote it because I didn't want to disappear again." The publisher titled it just as she had, "The Girl with the Lotus Mark." At the dedication page, she wrote, "To the mother who never stopped looking, to the girl who never stopped being." Claraara framed that page. It hung in their kitchen, next to the calendar and grocery list. The first reading took place at a small Asheville bookstore. Folding chairs, string lights, no press. Just locals, some curious, others quiet with recognition. Claraara sat in the front row. Bran stood in the back. Ella stepped up to the mic, holding the book close to her chest. 16 years ago, she began, someone decided who I was supposed to be. This book is about how I took that back. Her voice was steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she finally knew fear didn't control her anymore. When she finished, the room sat in silence. Then came soft applause, then louder. Some stood. Ella didn't cry. She smiled. She stayed. That night, as they walked home, Claraara asked, "How do you feel?" Ella looked up at the stars. "Like I found my place in the story, not as the victim, not as the mystery, as the one who lived." It wasn't a final chapter. There would be others, harder ones, better ones. But for the first time, the pen was in her hand, and no one else could hold it. Months passed. Ella's book reached more readers than she ever expected. Survivors wrote letters. Librarians hosted small discussions. High schoolers read excerpts aloud. One day, an invitation came from a restorative justice conference in Atlanta. Would she speak about reclaiming identity after forced separation? Ella almost declined, but Claraara gently encouraged her. "You don't owe the world your pain," she said, "but if you choose to share it, it becomes power." And so, Ella stood before a crowd once more, this time not as the missing girl in headlines, but as a woman holding her own narrative. "I am not what was done to me," she said into the mic. "I'm what I chose to become after." The room stood silent, reverent. Then someone whispered, "That's her." But this time, it wasn't a whisper of pity. It was recognition. It was respect. Afterward, a young woman approached her. "I was adopted under strange circumstances," she said. "Your story helped me ask questions I was too afraid to ask." Ella offered a soft smile and gave her a signed copy. "The truth is hard," she said, "but it's never heavier than living with silence." When she returned home, she found Claraara waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in hand. They sat together in the fading sun. "You're doing things I never imagined," Claraara said. "Not just surviving, changing lives." Ella leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "You're the reason I came back at all." And in that moment, there were no more broken years between them, just time they had claimed back, minute by healing minute. At a local book club, hosted by the Asheville Library, her mother's old workplace, Ella stood once again, this time not to read, but to listen. Other survivors spoke, some cried, some laughed. All of them were reclaiming pieces of themselves. One woman said, "You made me believe I could be more than a cautionary tale." Ella felt her throat tighten. She glanced at the photo pinned beside the entrance. Her toddler self, once part of a missing person flyer. It had been framed, now with a gold-foiled caption, "Found." She touched the glass. "That little girl," she whispered, "was never really gone. She was just waiting for someone to come find her." She turned to leave, but not before hearing someone ask, "What happened to the people who took her?" And another voice answered, "They lost her. She found herself." The Keslers remained behind bars. Rowan was transferred to a federal facility. Detective Holden retired 6 months later, his final report on the Marin case closing out a 30-year career. Bran took over his father's tavern fully, converting part of it into a small bookshop cafe. "You should read this," he'd tell customers, pointing to Ella's memoir. "It'll teach you what survival really looks like." Ella, for her part, chose not to visit the places where she had been hurt. Instead, she focused on building places where people could heal. She led writing workshops, volunteered at youth shelters, and one day, quietly, filed paperwork to begin the process of becoming a licensed therapist. "I want to help others find language," she told Claraara, "because silence is a cage, and no one deserves to live there forever." Claraara kissed her forehead, then helped them fly out. On the 2-year anniversary of her discovery, Ella hosted a candlelight gathering outside the Asheville courthouse. Dozens came, no media, just people, families still searching, survivors who had been found, mothers who still waited. They stood in a circle, each holding a candle. Ella stepped into the center, holding hers high. "Justice isn't always loud," she said. "Sometimes it whispers in a child's laugh, a mother's breath. A truth finally spoken." She looked out over the flames flickering in the dark. "You are not lost. You are still here." And as the wind passed through them, carrying the heat and hope of those candles into the night, Ella felt something rise inside her, something rooted, luminous, and entirely her own. If Ella's story touched you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Hidden Justice and join us in sharing real stories that expose hidden pain, restore hope, and prove that time does not erase truth. Every story we tell is for the families who never gave up and the survivors who found their voice. Comment below if you've ever witnessed a quiet act of justice, and share this video with someone who needs to believe healing is still possible. Your voice matters. Your attention matters. Help us bring more hidden stories into the light, one truth at a time.